Hey guys, tonight we're going to time travel way back, like way back to the aftermath of the Bronze Age collapse. A period so apocalyptic that even the historians can't agree on what really happened. Trade routes gone, cities burned, languages lost, entire civilizations just vanished, like somebody tripped over history's power cord. You're about to be dropped into that smoking crater, not as a king or a soldier, but as someone who's just trying to stay alive while everything familiar goes up in flames. And spoiler alert, you probably won't survive this. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. I'm curious, where are you watching from, and what time is it there? Drop it in the comments. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're standing barefoot on warm dust, staring at the collapsed wooden frame of what used to be your neighbor's house. There's smoke drifting from the fields again, and the smell of burnt grain hangs in the air like a warning. You've heard rumors for weeks, ships never arriving, scribes leaving town under cover of darkness, and now this. Your city isn't just having a bad harvest or a border skirmish. It's done. The Bronze Age isn't limping to a dignified end. It's being punched in the teeth and set on fire. You live in what was once the bustling eastern Mediterranean, maybe near Ugarit or Mycenae or Hattusa. Take your pick. They're all falling apart at roughly the same time. It's the 12th century BCE, and you don't know it yet, but you're witnessing one of the greatest civilizational crashes in human history. You also don't know the term Bronze Age, because you don't think of yourself as living in a particular age at all. You just know that the bronze your father used to trade for is gone. The tin shipments dried up, and the blacksmith hasn't opened his forge in weeks. There are still a few guards in the street, but they don't look official anymore. No uniform, no pay, just swords and grim expressions. The palace gates, once sealed, tight with seals and protocol, hang crooked. No one really runs things here now. The high priest left 3 days ago, taking what was left of the temple's silver with him. You remember when the festivals lit up the town square? When music echoed through the markets, and scribes scribbled furiously to record every shipment, every tax, every omen. Now the market's deserted. A goat wanders through, chewing something from a toppled stall. It didn't happen overnight. Sure, there were earthquakes, massive ones, enough to knock entire cities flat. Droughts, too. Some say even volcanoes, though the timeline is still fuzzy. The sea peoples, whoever they were, swept in like a tsunami, torching cities and cutting off coastal supply chains. The Egyptian pharaohs tried to stop them, and barely succeeded. The Hittites gone, Mycenaean palaces burned. Even mighty Babylon staggered. You'd think, with all the monumental stonework and gleaming bronze, these civilizations would have lasted longer. But complexity is a fragile thing, and when it cracks, it shatters. Here's a fun fringe fact. Some scholars think this all kicked off with a technological leap backward. Yes, backward. The very thing that fueled this world, bronze, relied on tin. And tin isn't exactly lying around in everyone's backyard. It came from far away, maybe as far as modern Afghanistan or even Cornwall in England. That's a long supply chain for something you desperately need to make weapons and tools. Cut off that supply, and your bronze-making days are over. People still argue whether it was resource scarcity, over-reliance on fragile trade routes, climate change, foreign invasions, internal rebellions, or some chaotic mix of all five that toppled this interconnected world. Honestly, the scholarly debate is like listening to a group project when no one did the reading. So, here you are, standing in the heat and ruin. You have a linen tunic, a family recipe for barley cakes, and maybe a cousin who knows how to catch fish without getting stabbed. That's about it. The city granaries were emptied weeks ago, either looted or rationed into oblivion. Water from the systems is getting murky. You've considered leaving, but where would you even go? News travels slowly, mostly by wandering traders or refugees, and all their stories sound the same. More fires, more ruin, more missing people. One of the eerie things is how fast things stop working. No taxes, so no government. No trade, so no craftsmen. No letters, because the scribes fled or died. Even the gods feel distant. The temples are cracked. The altars cold. You offer your last bit of incense. But part of you wonders if the gods left too. That old priest used to say the gods lived in the order of things. Well, the order's gone. Maybe the gods left first. But here's the thing about people. They're stubborn. You're still breathing, still cooking food over fire, still watching the sunrise. It's not pretty, and it sure isn't glorious, but it's survival. The elite classes are the ones hit hardest. Kings and generals with no troops, scribes with no patrons. But regular people, farmers, herders, basket weavers, they start adapting. They retreat from the cities, return to the countryside, build homes from mud, brick, and thatch. You strip nails from fallen buildings. You dig irrigation trenches with stone tools. You form tight-knit communities guarded by wooden fences instead of palace walls. And oddly, that's where the future starts. Not in a throne room, but in a smoky hut with 5 families huddled around a lentil stew, figuring out how not to die. You don't know it, but your kids or your grandkids will eventually lay the foundations for a whole new world. A world with different languages, smaller governments, and a cautious relationship with ambition. The Bronze Age didn't just collapse, it reset violently. You pick your way through the ruins, stepping over pottery shards and broken sandals. The sun's dipping low, casting everything in gold. A quiet breeze stirs the ashes of a world that thought it was eternal. You can feel it already. Nothing's coming to save you. There's no empire waiting in the wings. Just you, your people, and whatever you can scavenge before nightfall again. You're not special. That's the first thing you have to accept if you're going to make it. You're not a warrior hero from some dusty epic or a clever merchant ready to rebuild civilization with nothing but charm and sandal leather. You're one of the nobodies. The faceless thousands history barely remembers. No monuments are carved for you. No poets chant your name. But you still wake up every morning. You still draw breath. That alone makes you part of something remarkable. The scrappy, sweaty survival of the ordinary person after everything else has collapsed. Let's be clear. This isn't post-apocalyptic in the glamorous leather jacket and makeshift crossbow kind of way. This is messy, desperate survival. The kind where your biggest achievement today might be finding clean water or patching a roof with woven reeds before the next storm. The palace guard who used to march down your street, He's now begging for food 2 villages away. The merchant who sold cinnamon and dyed cloths. She's herding goats on a hillside and pretending it was always her dream to live off the land. All the rules, roles, and social statuses have been appended, and in the silence that follows a collapse, the people left standing are mostly the ones who never relied on those rules in the first place. You were probably born into this mess. Or if not, you were young when the ships stopped coming and the world stopped making sense. No more shipments from Cyprus. No more Egyptian scribes cataloging offerings at the temple. No more bronze axes traded for sacks of grain. Your family used to buy tools from metal workers. Now your uncle makes them out of stone and calls it traditional craftsmanship, though you're pretty sure he made that up. A good flint blade gets passed around like treasure. Broken ones get reshaped until there's almost nothing left but jagged edges and sore fingers. You're lucky if you know how to grow food or fish or tan a hide. These are no longer humble, overlooked skills. Now they're survival codes. The people who once held the power, the priests, the scribes, the palace accountants, they're fumbling through this just like everyone else, often worse. You trade with your neighbors, sometimes for food, sometimes for shelter, sometimes for things that feel small but aren't. Firewood, a pair of sandals, information. Gossip spreads faster than anything else. Mostly warnings, which roads are dangerous, who might still have salt, which gods are still answering prayers. Any of them are. You watch a child, barefoot and smeared with ash, chase a chicken through the dirt. She's laughing somehow. Even with everything burning or crumbling, kids still laugh. That's one of the weirder things about life after the collapse. It's not all misery. There are moments of peace, even joy, flickering like fireflies in the dark. You eat roasted lentils under a star-filled sky. You tell stories by firelight and hear your grandparents' voices softened by time. You wake up one morning and realize it's been 3 days since anyone cried. That's how people survive, not with heroic acts, but with tiny victories stacked like stones. Here's a strange but true fact. Even as civilization collapses, some people flourish, sort of. There are fringe communities that never bought into the palace system to begin with. They lived in the hills, in marginal lands the big kingdoms ignored. They didn't have grand temples, or literacy, or gold-plated furniture. But now, without anything to lose, they're at an advantage. They already know how to get by on little. They don't rely on trade routes or grain rations. You might find yourself among them, learning new ways to hunt, gathering strange herbs for medicine, using animal fat as waterproofing. They survive through familiarity with hardship, not through dominance. And now, weirdly, you need them more than they ever needed you. The debate among modern scholars is whether most people died in the collapse, or whether they just changed. Some argue for mass depopulation, widespread famine, warfare, disease. Others think many people simply left the cities and faded into rural anonymity where archaeology can't easily track them. It's still argued over, like an ancient grudge match. But down here in the weeds of survival, you don't need charts and pottery shards to understand what's happening. You just need to watch the steady stream of people leaving urban ruins behind, carrying everything they own in baskets and blankets, looking for fertile land, friendly faces, and anything that isn't on fire. you probably travel to, eventually either by choice or necessity. Maybe your well dries up. Maybe the bandits get too bold. Maybe someone dies and there's no one left to help you bury them. So, you gather your things, whatever's left, and walk. You follow riverbanks, overgrown paths, and stars you don't fully trust. You trade stories around campfires with other wanderers. Some people you meet are kind, some are not. There are places where whole villages have vanished overnight, and others where new communities are building themselves from the ground up, complete with shared grain stores, communal watch systems, and rules scrolled on animal skins. Eventually, you settle somewhere new, not because it's perfect, but because it's stable enough. There's water. There's land to plant. There are people willing to work together without stabbing each other over goats. It's not a city. It's not even a town, really, but it's a beginning. You build a hut. You dig a pit for compost. You learn how to make thread from flax. And in the quiet moments when you're not exhausted or hungry, you notice that something like hope is growing again. Tentative, fragile, but real. You don't miss the old world as much as you thought you would. Sure, you miss things, warm bread from the baker, songs echoing from temple walls, the clang of bronze in the forge. But those things feel distant now, like dreams. What you care about now is whether the roof leaks, and whether the seeds you planted will sprout, whether the old man in the next hut will survive the winter, and if he doesn't, who will look after his daughter. You care about people, not systems, about survival, not status. So, know you're not special. You're something better, resilient, and that might just be enough. Hunger has a voice. It's not loud. It doesn't shout. It hums in the background of every waking moment. The dull pressure behind your eyes, in your belly, in the way your limbs feel heavier than they should. And in this post-collapse world, that voice is the new town crier. It tells you everything you need to know. The rains were late. The granary is almost empty. And winter's coming, whether you're ready or not. There's no such thing as a reliable harvest anymore. The systems that once managed irrigation, tracked planting cycles, stored surplus grain, and redistributed it during lean times, they're gone. The scribes who tallied offerings to the gods and managed food logistics have long since fled or starved, or vanished into the dusty folds of the countryside. Now it's just you, a few stone hoes, and the hope that the weather doesn't betray you again. You remember when fields stretched in orderly rows, managed by workers who reported to officials who reported to the palace. Now the fields are patchy, erratic. Some were abandoned during the chaos. Others were claimed by whoever showed up next. You plant what seeds you can save: barley, lentils, maybe some emmer wheat if you're lucky. You dig with tools that would have embarrassed your grandfather: wooden plows reinforced with bone, chipped flint blades, anything that gets the job done. You compost every scrap, every dung pile, every fish head. Nothing is wasted. Waste is for people who still live in cities with choices, and the famine doesn't announce itself all at once. It arrives slowly, like a bad smell. First, you notice that meals are getting smaller. Then you start skipping meals entirely, giving more to children or elders. Then come the substitutions: acorns ground into bitter paste, roots boiled into sludge, bark steeped into something vaguely edible. Your body shrinks into itself. Faces grow gaunt. Conversations turn thin and clipped. You learn to ration not just food, but your words. The worst days are in the middle of the dry season, when everything seems stretched and brittle. Children cry lest they don't have the energy. The old ones stop talking altogether, as if they're trying to leave quietly. Some people wander off and don't come back. You try not to ask where they went. Maybe they found food. Maybe they did. Fringe survival tactics become your normal. Eating insects. Absolutely. Fermenting spoiled grain into something vaguely nutritious. Sure, animal bones are boiled until they crumble, every drop of fat and marrow wrung out like treasure. The dogs that used to sleep at your feet are now competitors for scraps. Or on the darkest days, they become meat themselves. You don't judge anyone. Not anymore. But here's a strange thing. Some people still thrive not in the golden palace sense, but in the I haven't starved to death sense. Up in the highlands or out in the river valleys, there are communities that figured it out early. They store grain in clay-sealed pits underground. They rotate crops. They keep bees. They cooperate. It sounds simple, but in this new world, sharing is radical. The village where people pool resources is safer than one where everyone hoards their own dwindling supplies. You trade with them when you can if they'll let you. Sometimes you even think about moving there. One particularly dry season, you meet a trader or what passes for one now. His cart is pulled by a donkey so thin it's practically see-through, and he offers goods like dried figs, salted fish, and smoked locusts. You trade him a finely woven reed mat and a few carved bone needles. He tells you about a settlement 3 days' walk, a priver that still has water, trees, and even, he swears, a woman who bakes bread with wild herbs. It sounds like a myth, but then again, so did famine until it wasn't. There's an old song your grandmother used to sing about the gods of grain, the ones who made wheat grow, who blessed the threshing floor, who kept rats from the storage jars. You haven't heard that song in a long time. You wonder if the gods left, or if they're just waiting for people to remember the old ways. Maybe the collapse was their punishment. Maybe it was just bad luck. You're too tired to care about the difference. Scholars today argue endlessly over whether drought caused the famine, or if famine was just one symptom of the greater collapse. Some think climate change, possibly driven by volcanic activity or shifting ocean currents, triggered a chain reaction. Crop failures, famine, migration, war. Others say political systems failed first and food insecurity followed. But for you, standing barefoot in a cracked field under a sky that refuses to rain, the origin doesn't matter. Hunger is hunger. It doesn't care about timelines. You adapt. That's your only choice. You learn to harvest wild barley, to dig tubers others overlook, to ferment anything even slightly sweet. You collect morning dew in cloth bundles and squeeze it into jars. You trade in seeds and recipes more than coin. In fact, coin is useless now. No one wants metal. People want calorie salt, honey, dried meat, legumes, anything that fills a belly and staves off the cold ache of emptiness. And despite it, all despite the hunger and the grief and the endless scraping for survival, you go on. Maybe that's the most human thing about this whole chapter in history. You shouldn't survive. Statistically, you don't. but somehow you do. Not because of strength, not because of divine favor, but because you know how to stretch one loaf of bread, how to share one pot of stew, how to listen when someone tells you about a hidden spring or a patch of wild onions near the cliffs. So yes, the famine is real and brutal, but so is your endurance. And tonight, like most nights, you sit near a fire with others fewer than before, but still breathing, and you pass around a small bowl of roasted seeds. It's not enough, not really, but you all pretend it is. And for a while, that's almost the same thing. Someone hums the start of a song no one quite remembers. You lean back, your ribs visible beneath your tunic, your stomach still empty, but your spirit somehow not. The first time you hear the word sea peoples, it's more of a whisper than a warning. A passing trader mutters it like a curse, spitting afterward to ward off bad luck. You don't even know what it means. Are they pirates? A lost tribe? A vengeful army summoned by angry gods? No one can say for sure, and the stories swirl like dust devils. They come from the sea, they burn everything. They ride boats with curved prows like bird beaks, and they don't leave survivors. It sounds like a ghost story. But then, one day, smoke rises from the coastland. You stop thinking it's just a rumor. The raiders are real. You don't see them up close at first. What you see are the people they've left behind. Refugees, women and children, staggering into your valley with hollow eyes and blistered feet. They speak broken versions of your language, or none at all. They carry what little they could grab: baskets, idols, blankets, half-dead goats. You feed them what you can. You listen to their stories with a growing pit in your stomach. They describe villages erased overnight, whole coastlines pillaged, fishing boats set on fire just to choke the harbors with ash and fear. The sea peoples, whoever they are, don't just conquer. They erase. At night, you watch the horizon nervously. Your village is inland, tucked between dry hills. Not exactly the most strategic target, but that doesn't mean you're safe. No one is. That's what makes them so terrifying. There's no logic to their path. They aren't an army with a front line, they're a swarm. They hit Cyprus, Ugarit, parts of Keweenawen, try to breach Egypt. And while Egypt barely holds them off, you know from the stories that even the mighty Pharaoh had to go full panic mode, scrambling to fortify the Nile Delta like it was the end of the world, which, for many, it was. There's a theory some of them might have been displaced peoples, maybe from the Aegean or Western Anatolia, desperate migrants driven by famine, earthquakes, and collapse, just like you. But if that's true, they're survivalists with torches. They travel with entire families, but fight like cornered wolves. Scholars still argue over their origin. Were they Mycenaeans who lost their homes? A confederation of raiders? Proto-Vikings of the Mediterranean? No one really knows. They didn't leave behind much but ashes and broken walls. But in this moment, you're not debating origin stories. You're digging a trench. You and your neighbors build defenses as best you can. Spiked fences, watchtowers made of old carts stacked with mud bricks, even crude alarm systems with bells hung on strings. It's primitive, but it's all you've got. You designate someone to watch the horizon during the day. At night, you rotate guards, and everyone sleeps with a club or spear within reach. you've never had to fight before. Not really. Now, you train with sticks, listen for distant hoofbeats, and pray the wind doesn't carry the wrong kind of smoke. You're not alone in this panic. Across the Mediterranean, surviving communities do the same. Coastal cities build up their walls or abandon them entirely. Inland settlements swell with displaced families. The maps that once defined empires and borders are now meaningless. What matters now is proximity to water, arable land, and whether your neighbors will turn you in for a sack of barley one morning. A boy spots something on the horizon, or maybe just shadows of boats gliding like ghosts along the river. The village freezes. You feel your stomach drop. Is this it? Are they finally here? You grip a spear you barely know how to use. Your hands are sweating and your heart sounds like war drums in your chest. But then nothing. The shadows pass. Maybe they were just fishing canoes. Maybe they weren't. You never find out. And that's part of the cruelty. Fear becomes a constant background hum. Every rustle in the trees, every shout in the distance, it might be them. And the worst part? You start to understand them. You don't agree with the burning and killing. No, but you understand the desperation. The sea peoples don't destroy because they're evil. They destroy because they're starving. Because their homes were crushed by quakes or swallowed by drought. Because their crops failed and no one helped. Because when the world ended, they didn't just roll over. They picked up spears and sails and said, "Fine, we'll take what we need." You realize that in a slightly different version of this story, you might have been them. One fringe theory even suggests that the sea peoples weren't a single group at all, but dozens of collapsing peoples clumped together by terrified survivors who couldn't tell one attacker from another. Maybe the name was just a catch-all, like a label slapped on the chaos, so people had anyone to blame. You hear that the cities they hit the hardest, the ones along the Levantian coast, never really recover. Some become ghost towns, piles of blackened stone and pottery shards. Others get rebuilt generations later with new names and different gods. But by then, the sea peoples are long gone, swallowed by history, melted into local populations, or lost at sea. They leave no written record, only destruction and fear and stories like the ones now tattooed into your memory. Over time, the raids slow not because they're defeated, but because there's less and less worth taking. A burned city doesn't get raided twice. The sea peoples vanish the way they arrived, suddenly and without explanation. And in the silence that follows, you realize something. Survival isn't just about defending yourself. It's about rebuilding something afterward. Anything. You start focusing on what's next, strengthening the village walls, trading again, teaching the younger ones how to plant and harvest. You try to forget the days spent waiting for death by sail and spear, but it never fully leaves you. Every cloud on the horizon still tightens your gut. Every silence still feels like a warning. And when someone asks you years later what it was like when the sea peoples came, you won't have a clean answer. You'll just shake your head, stare into the fire, and say, "We weren't ready." No one was. By now, you've figured out that if you want something done, you're going to have to do it yourself. The old world had specialists for everything: masons, potters, bakers, scribes, midwives, astronomers. Now you're the mason, the potter, and the baker. And if your roof leaks, your bread burns, or your clay jars crack in the firewell, congratulations. You've just learned something the hard way. In this post-collapse world, there's no one left to call. The age of the generalist has begun. You start building with what's around you: mud, straw, wood, stone if you can find it. There's no cutting timber from distant forests or hauling exotic marble. Every bit of material is hauled on your back or dragged on a sled of bundled sticks. You mix mud brick in shallow pits, stomping barefoot until your feet are stained the color of earth. Then you mold it by hand, bake it in the sun, and stack it into walls that might last a season if you're lucky. Your home is simple: one room, low ceiling, a hole in the roof for smoke to escape. You sleep on woven mats, share space with goats or chickens, and hang dried herbs from the rafters. There's no privacy, no furniture beyond what you can build with a hatchet and patience. And yet, it's yours. You built it. No landlord, no overseer, no king's tax collector, just your hands and the dirt beneath them. Food is still a struggle, but you've gotten smarter. You learned how to dry fish using smoke and hot stones. You plant beans in between your barley to fix the soil. You even figured out how to make a crude sort of cheese using nothing but animal stomach lining and warm sun. Your ancestors would be proud or horrified. It's hard to say. You trade some of what you grow or make for other essentials: a new flint blade, a bundle of salt, a coil of twine. It's all barter now, and the currency is effort. You also keep a toolkit: a few flint scrapers, some bones, a wooden mallet, a hammerstone. These things matter more than gold ever did. Gold can't dig a trench or cut firewood, but a good scraper, that's survival. You sharpen your blades against river stones and keep them wrapped in leather when not in use. You learn which kinds of wood bend without breaking, which ones burn hot, and which ones split to easily. Every object you own tells a story about how hard you worked for it. Some of the older folks talk about the time before, the time when tools were made of bronze, when carts had wheels bound with iron nails, when lamps burned oil from foreign shores. You've seen some of those artifacts in the dirt: a snapped bronze dagger, a broken loom weight, a crumbled tablet with writing you can't read. These objects feel alien now, like they belong to a different species. You pick them up, turn them over in your hands, and wonder how people could live with so much complexity. But not all knowledge was lost. You remember things. You share stories. Someone in your village knows how to make soap from ash and fat. Another knows how to set a broken arm with sticks and cloth. Someone else has preserved an old chant that keeps rhythm for harvesting grain. These bits of information, tiny fragments, are how you rebuild, not as it was, but as it can be now. One day, a stranger arrives in your village, pulling a cart with squeaky wooden wheels. He has a patched cloak and a sun-darkened face, and when he opens his mouth, he speaks your language with a strange twist. He carries tools, not new, but sharp and well-kept. He trades for food, offers to help reinforce your storage hut. You watch him work and realize he knows things you don't. He shows you how to lash branches into arches for a stronger roof. He repairs a broken pot using a method you've never seen before, stitching the shards together with copper wire. You've never seen anyone stitch clay before. It feels like watching someone perform a magic trick with dirt. You're reminded in that moment that knowledge is the real treasure now. Not the big shiny kind passed down in scrolls or scribbled in temples, but the everyday kind. The wisdom of how to make things that don't fall apart. How to clean a wound without killing someone. How to tell the weather by the shape of the clouds. How to trap birds without a net. These things are survival, and they're slipping through the cracks unless someone passes them on. There's a debate among modern historians about just how much knowledge survived the collapse. Some say the loss was catastrophic, like humanity forgetting how to write its own name. Others argue that knowledge didn't vanish. It just went underground. It left the cities, the libraries, the temples, and found refuge in villages like yours, in minds like yours. Maybe people didn't forget how to do things. Maybe they just stopped doing them until it made sense again. Fringe theories even suggest that some collapse survivors chose simplicity, that they walked away from complexity because they realized it made them vulnerable. They didn't want to depend on foreign tin to make tools or centralized governments to manage food. They wanted to know how to do everything themselves, not because it was romantic, but because it was safer. Harder, yes, but safer. So now you live in a world of tools that you make, clothes that you stitch, homes that you patch with mud when it rains, and you're still standing. Maybe your hands are blistered and your back aches every evening, but you've survived earthquakes, famine, and raiders. You've stared into the hollow pit of what used to be civilization, and you've said, "Fine, let's start again." You walk past your field one evening, the barley swaying in the wind like golden fur. You've placed small traps near the edge for rabbits. A few kids chase each other through the grass, and someone's playing a tune on a bone flute. Smoke rises from your cook fire. The tools are laid out beside it, cleaned, sharpened, ready for another day. And in that moment, something soft and quiet blooms in your chest. It's not pride. It's not hope, exactly. It's just this. You're doing it with scraped hands and scavenged knowledge. With no map and no safety net, you're surviving. And maybe that's what rebuilding actually looks like. Not a dramatic comeback. Not a sudden return to glory. Just one handmade tool at a time. The gods, it turns out, are a lot quieter after the world ends. The towering temples you once walked past, columns reaching for the heavens, painted friezes, priests chanting in languages only they were allowed to know, are mostly rubble now. And even if a few still stand, the incense has long stopped burning. The offerings picked clean. The scribes who tracked lunar omens and translated dreams into prophecies gone or dead. Or chopping wood, just like the rest of you. But here's the funny part. Belief doesn't collapse just because buildings do. Even now, people still pray. You still pray. It's not the same, of course. You're not kneeling before golden statues or washing your hands in a sacred basin before approaching the altar. Now, you mutter prayers while planting seeds, while boiling water, while holding your breath beside a child burning with fever. The rituals are smaller, grittier, less about divine spectacle, more about survival insurance. You whisper the old names, Baal, Asherah, Ishtar, Yahweh, sometimes without knowing what they meant, only that someone long ago told you they mattered. Religion used to be a performance, public, majestic way for kings to show they had a direct line to the divine. Now, faith feels personal, desperate. You're not looking for miracles. You just want the rats to stay out of the grain jar, and for the river not to dry up before planting season. You remember the last festival before everything fell apart. It was the festival of the moon, or maybe the harvest, right? Honestly, they all blurred together. There were garlands, bread offerings, flute players in white robes. Everyone was pretending things were fine. The high priest still gave blessings. The merchants still donated extra grain to the temple storehouses. But you knew, everyone knew, the gods weren't answering like they used to. Now people worship in corners. A chicken bone tied with red thread hung above a door. A carved stone face buried at the foot of a tree. A song hummed under the breath while washing hands in morning dew. No one really agrees on the details anymore. Every household invents its own flavor of faith. Some cling to the old pantheon, patching together broken myths. Others turn to ancestral spirits or invent new ones entirely. One man in your village swears his grandfather became a guardian spirit after dying during a lightning storm. Another claims that the wind speaks to her when she sleeps near olive trees. You're not sure what you believe. Some days you think the gods abandoned the world when the palaces fell. Other days you wonder if they're watching quietly, waiting to see who makes it through. Either way, it doesn't really change how you live. There's a fringe idea whispered among traveling herders. Maybe the gods were the system, not real, not spiritual, just manifestations of order, power, control. The temple was law. The high priest was government. The rituals were bureaucracy and costume. When that structure cracked, so did the illusion. Now, without priests and scrolls to define them, the gods scatter like dust. Or maybe that's just something bitter people say when they've gone too long without answers. But even with the old religion fractured, symbols still hold power. You carry an amulet carved from shell, passed down from your mother. She said it protected her during childbirth. You don't know the name of the god it honors, but you still wear it, still touch it before sleeping. You've seen too much to abandon faith entirely. People need stories. People need meaning. And sometimes, when the wind shifts or the stars flicker just right, you feel like maybe, just maybe, something is still listening. Some villagers try to revive the old rituals, stitched together from memory. A woman gathers herbs and burns them while chanting syllables she only half remembers. A man offers his first barley harvest to a stone idol dug from the creek bed. It's clumsy, heartfelt. No one has the authority to say if it's right or wrong anymore, which honestly might be a relief. One evening, a stranger arrives. He's a wanderer, thin as bone, face darkened by dust and sun. But his voice is strong, and when he speaks, people gather. He doesn't look like a priest, but he talks like one. He speaks of one God, a single divine force, above all others. Some folks scoff. One God? That's not enough gods. Others listen, wide-eyed, drawn to the simplicity. You hear whispers later that this new God doesn't demand temples or sacrifices, just belief and obedience. It sounds appealing in a way, efficient, portable, like a religion that survives collapse by going minimalist. You don't convert. Not exactly, but you add the name of this God to your mental list, just in case. You've seen what happens when people get too sure about divine protection. Historians today still debate how religion evolved after the collapse. Some say local cults took over, sprouting like weeds in the ruins of centralized systems. Others think this fragmentation laid the groundwork for the rise of monotheism, religions that offered structure and unity when the world felt like chaos. There's even a theory that faith became more emotional or individual because people no longer trusted institutions to mediate between them and the divine. You see truth in all of it. The old gods are still there somewhere, but they don't hold the monopoly anymore. Faith is wild, now decentralized, spread across 1,000 little practices stitched into daily life. And even if you're not sure who's watching or if anyone is, you still murmur a prayer before planting, before boiling water, before walking alone at night, not because you believe necessarily, but because you hope. And in a world that's been through what yours has, hope might be the closest thing to sacred that's left. Later that night, you sit by the fire, rubbing calloused fingers over your shell amulet. The stars are bright, crisp, distant. Someone's humming an old temple tune, low and slow. You close your eyes and, just for a moment, you let yourself imagine that something hears you, something ancient, patient, waiting. Maybe that's enough. You've heard stories about Egypt since you were old enough to sit still near a fire. Back when your own people still had temples and cities, Egypt was already ancient land of pyramids, lotus-crowned pharaohs, and a river that never stopped giving. They said the Nile was eternal. They said Egypt would never fall. And yet now, even mighty Egypt is flinching. You hear it first from a merchant leathery-skinned and missing a few teeth who trades copper pins and stories for a warm place to sleep. He says the grain ships from Egypt have stopped coming. That's the first sign. Egypt always had grain. Always. The rest of the world could be starving, but Egypt would still have barley, fish, and dates. That's just how it was. But something's changed. He says they've started hoarding their own supplies, fortifying their cities. Their king, what's his name now? Ramses something, is holding on to power by tightening his grip and sharpening his sword. Not long after that, you meet a family from the Delta, 3 kids and 2 tired-looking parents who managed to escape with nothing but a sack of lentils and a few scraps of linen. Their skin is dusted with salt and sunburn, their feet wrapped in rags. They speak with the soft cadence of the Nile, and they tell you with haunted eyes that Egypt did not fall, but it almost did. The sea. Peoples reached the Egyptian coast not long ago. They came with sails wide and blades ready, expecting to plunder, as they had elsewhere. But Egypt wasn't just a city with a wall. It was a civilization wrapped around a river, defended by armies that had trained for generations. Ramesses III, the current pharaoh, managed to turn them back in a battle that supposedly shook the sand from the pyramids. His inscriptions boast of victory. The foreign lands made a conspiracy in their islands. Their hearts and their souls are finished. And the temples still echo with those words. But that's the official story. And in your world, you've learned not to trust the official story. The truth you piece together from travelers and exiles is more complicated. Egypt may have won the battle, but it didn't win the war. The invaders didn't raze the cities, but they shattered the economy. Entire stretches of farmland were abandoned after laborers fled or died. The irrigation systems, once so reliable, went untended. Some villages went months without supplies from the economy. Entire stretches of farmland were abandoned after laborers fled or died. The irrigation systems, once so reliable, went untended. Some villages went months without supplies from the capital. The temples, bloated and ceremonial, couldn't offer much more than chants. Famine crept in, just like everywhere else. Worse, the bureaucracy that held Egypt together, the scribes, the tax collectors, the stewards of grain and labor, began to crumble. Documents stopped flowing. Messages were delayed. Some scribes started forging reports to protect themselves. Others vanished, taking their skills and records with them. The state still existed, technically, but it was rotting from within, like a granary infested with weevils. And here's the part that stuns you most. Egypt, land of divine kings and eternal laws, had to cut corners. Temples stopped receiving regular offerings. Tombs for the elite were downsized or left unfinished. Even the pharaoh's palace reduced its court rituals, no longer feeding hundreds of retainers each day. It's said that one nobleman buried his wife with borrowed jewelry, cheap substitutes carved from painted wood, instead of real gold. Egypt, it seems, was surviving, but barely. There's a fringe belief, whispered among some outcasts, that Egypt's near collapse was divine punishment, that the gods were tired of the pride of men and used the sea peoples to humble even the most ancient kingdom. Others argue the sea peoples were just the spark, that Egypt's real sickness was overreach, too many wars, too much centralization, too little flexibility, a state so obsessed with order that it couldn't adapt when the world turned upside down. You meet someone who once served at a small temple in Thebes. He speaks in hushed tones about how, after the attacks, they buried sacred scrolls in sealed jars because they feared looters or, worse, state collapse. He says some priests tried to preserve rituals by teaching children in secret passing chants and incantations like contraband. He carries one such chant on a scrap of cloth sewn into the hem of his tunic. He says it's a protection hymn meant to keep home safe during storm and war. You believe him not because you know it works, but because you need to believe something still does. And yet, even in decline, Egypt holds a strange allure. It's one of the few places where you can still see functioning cities, even if they're shadows of what they once were. Boats still move along the Nile. Markets still hum. You consider traveling there just to see it, but you hesitate. You've heard that outsiders aren't welcome anymore, that fear has hardened their borders, that hospitality is reserved only for those who prove useful. Still, you wonder what it would be like to see the Nile, this river that outlived kings, floods, wars, even the sea peoples. Maybe Egypt didn't fall. Maybe it just learned to flinch, to duck when the world swung its blade. And maybe that's the difference between collapse and survival. Scholars today still marvel that Egypt endured while its neighbors crumbled. Some chalk it up to geography. The Nile's predictable flooding offered a buffer. Others say it was sheer political inertia, the weight of millennia pressing forward. A few even suggest that Egypt's religion, so deeply embedded into daily life, provided stability in a way that others couldn't replicate. No one agrees on the exact reason, and maybe that's because survival isn't something you can pin to a single cause. It's messy, uneven, unpredictable like everything else. Now, that night, you stare at the stars and think of Egypt far to the south, glowing dimly like a dying coal in a vast dark hearth. You picture its temples, half-lit, its priests chanting hollow hymns, its soldiers watching the riverbanks with tired eyes, still there, still holding on, just like you. You don't realize it right away, but you're living in a post-city world. Not post-human, not post-culture, just post-city. The big stone-built centers of bureaucracy, trade, and royal drama are gone or dying. No more grid-planned roads, no more palace archives, no more scribes recording the arrival of tribute shipments like they're the center of the universe. And in their place, mud huts, wattle fences, goats chewing on the remains of what used to be courtyards. The age of empire has given way to the age of the village. You used to live in a city, or near enough to one that had affected your life. Back then, cities meant grain storage, law codes, priests, and marketplaces. It meant you didn't have to know how to do everything yourself, because someone else did it for you, a cobbler, a potter, a toolmaker. But the moment the city burned or emptied out, those specialists scattered like birds. Without trade, cities don't work. Without protection, they're just targets. You watched as the last traders packed up their carts, the priests shut their temple doors, and even the rats got bored and moved on. Now you live in a cluster of homes that doesn't have a name. Or if it does, it changes depending on who you ask. Some call it the upper fields. Others just call it the place by the bend in the river. It's a collection of huts, lean-tos, and semi-permanent shelters, ringed with a few makeshift fences and a couple of watchfires. There's no market square, numbered temple, no written laws. What you have instead are conversations, constant ones. Because when everything depends on cooperation, trust, and who's good at smoking fish, talking is survival. The rules of your village aren't written anywhere, but everyone knows them. Share water. Don't steal food. Don't lead raiders here. If you're caught lying about your stores in the middle of winter, you're gone. Not punished, gone. Sent away to walk into the forest and take your chances with the jackals. It sounds brutal, but it works. Brutality and order have started to look a lot like the same thing these days, and you trade. Oh, do you trade? Not with coins or weights or stamped seals that stuff's done. You trade smoked meat for woven baskets, dried herbs for goat cheese, a hand-stitched tunic for a fishhook made from carved bone. It's bartering, sure, but it's also reputation. You trade fairly because if you don't, you might not get a second chance. People talk. One bad deal, and suddenly no one wants your dried figs anymore. And trust me, figs rot fast when no one's buying. A traveling woman once passed through carrying a basket of clay tablets from some ruined city. She said they were receipts, records of trade, inventories of temple offerings. She was planning to repurpose them into roofing tiles. You asked if you could keep one. You don't know what it says, but you like the idea that it once meant something. Now it holds your door open on windy days. Civilization becomes a paperweight in the blink of a generation. But even here in your mud and thatch world, there's change. New structures rise. Storage pits become communal. Walls get built higher. A grain cache is started, watched over by a council of 3 older women who remember how things used to work. You laugh when someone calls them queens. They laugh, too. But deep down, you know it's not a joke. In a world without kings, the most organized person with the least tolerance for nonsense becomes the closest thing to royalty. There's something comforting about it. Honestly, the village isn't grand. It's not impressive, but it works. People eat. Children play. You've built a water catchment system out of clay jars and old roof tiles. Someone even taught themselves how to make soap from ash and goat fat. Another makes a decent musical instrument from hollowed wood and string. At night, the sound of it floats over the thatched rooftops, soft and cracked like memory itself. You still find artifacts, sometimes bits of bronze, chunks of worked stone, a child's toy carved from ivory. Sometimes you try to imagine the city they came from, what it smelled like, what it sounded like, who the child was, whose fingers last held this tiny horse-shaped figure. But the city is gone. Not just burned, but erased, scavenged brick by brick. Its bones fed into new walls, new hearths, new homes. You're not rebuilding that world. You're building something different. There's a theory among archaeologists today that these villages weren't just temporary shelters after the collapse. They were deliberate choices. People chose smaller, tighter communities where power was shared and risks were managed together. They weren't just waiting for cities to come back. They were moving on. Some scholars call it urbanization. But you think that word misses the point. It's not that people forgot how to build cities. It's that they remembered what mattered more. You know someone who tried to go back. He left your village, heading toward a ruined city he'd heard rumors about. Said it had walls still standing and half a palace left. He came back 6 weeks later, covered in dirt and shame. The city was there, sure, but it was dead. The kind of dead that smells. Wild dogs and scavengers lived there now. No ghosts, no treasure, just echoes. He doesn't talk about it anymore. He built a hut near the northern fence and hasn't left since. Sometimes at night, people talk about the old world like it was a dream. They speak of ships so large they carried whole orchards, of libraries with walls of text, of towers built to honor stars. And then someone throws another stick on the fire and says, "But we've got goats." And everyone laughs because it's true. And in this new age, a good goat is worth more than any crumbling tower. You fall asleep that night to the sound of frogs near the stream. Someone snoring 3 huts away, and the wind slipping through red fences. It's not the sound of a city, but it's the sound of life. And that, you think, might be better. You wouldn't think survival has a sound, but it does. In the Anatolian highlands, it's the scrape of stone hoes against dry earth. It's the soft murmur of women shelling lentils under olive trees. The bark of a dog chasing a goat that refuses to be milked. And the low rumble of thunder that might mean rain or might just pass you by, like so many promises up here. Far from the crumbling palaces and raided coastlines, there's a different kind of quiet. Not the silence of destruction, but of endurance. Your people didn't build monuments. They weren't the ones carving records onto stone stele or writing poetry on gold-leaf scrolls. If the cities were the loud, glittering heart of the Bronze Age, the highlands were its lungs, steady, rhythmic, mostly ignored. And yet, when everything else collapsed, guess who was still breathing? You wake up to the smell of damp earth and goat dung ass, always. The village here doesn't have roads so much as paths worn by bare feet and the dragging of sleds. The houses are squat and circular, built low to the ground to keep out the wind and hold in the heat. There's a central fire pit, a few granaries made of packed clay, and terrace fields climbing the slopes like patient stairways. No stone walls, no towers, no temples, just the essentials. You were lucky to find this place. After your home near the coast fell burned, abandoned, looted, take your pick, you wandered for weeks through forests, over rivers, past towns that no longer existed. You slept under trees, bartered for scraps. Once killed a snake with a stick and ate it 3 days later, and then you found the farmers. Or maybe they found you. They weren't exactly welcoming, but they weren't hostile either. They watched you like a wild animal for days before deciding you were more useful than dangerous. That's the standard now. Life here is built around routine, and that's exactly what makes it survivable. The people rise with the sun and work until dusk. They grow barley, immer wheat, pulses, modest crops, but reliable. The soil isn't rich, but it holds enough memory of rain to yield food if treated right. There's a spring nearby, cold and stubborn. You learn to channel the water in narrow ditches that snake between the terraces. They showed you how to use sheep's wool mixed with clay to line your grain baskets and keep the damp out. There's no hierarchy here. Not really. Just a loose consensus led by the oldest among them, old man with crooked fingers who knows how to graft fig trees. A woman with a deep scar across her shoulder who tells stories in a sing-song voice while spinning flax. They remember the cities. They remember the collapse. They don't talk about it unless pressed. And when they do, their eyes shift to the sky like they're checking for omens. One of the most surprising things about life here is how little changes. Outside, people are fighting over scraps, forming warbands, trying to carve little thrones out of someone else's ruins. But here it's another planting, another harvest, another winter survived. They keep goats and sheep not for meat, but for milk, wool, and warmth. Nothing is wasted. Every piece of bone becomes a tool. Every broken pot gets patched with pitch or repurposed as a bowl for chickens. Some days you wonder if this is what it means to live in a dark age, not chaos and fire, but repetition, simplicity, a slower rhythm. But then again, maybe that's not such a bad thing. When everything else was burning, these people were still here, still farming, still passing down songs and herbal remedies, and ways to keep grain from sprouting in storage. Civilization doesn't just fall, it softens, changes shape, adapts to the cracks. And here in the highlands, it keeps a low profile. Modern archaeologists argue about places like this. They dig into the highlands and find layers of simple domestic life, unbroken by war or collapse. They debate whether these people were refugees from cities or just rural communities that had always existed on the margins. Some say these settlements were the true continuity of human culture during the collapse, preserving basic survival knowledge while the elite structures crumbled. Others argue they were isolated holdouts, lucky pockets of stability surrounded by chaos. The truth, probably both. There's a strange moment one morning months after you've settled in, when you look around and realize you no longer feel like an outsider. Your feet know the paths. Your hands know the rhythm of grinding grain. You can name every child in the village and tell whose goat is bleeding from half a mile away. You've stopped counting the days since the collapse. You've stopped waiting for someone to come fix it. You're fixing it yourself, one pot, one seed, one shared meal at a time. And as the sun rises over the terraced fields, casting long shadows over the stone walls and the quietly chewing goats, you understand something simple and profound. Survival isn't a single act of heroism. It's a daily choice. And today, like yesterday, you choose to keep going. Hands have calluses in all the right places. You know the seasons of the land. You know who to trust with your tools and who will try to take more than they give. You've even started to dream in the dialect they speak. Hear its rough consonants and soft vowels weaving into your thoughts. Like roots in soil, a boy is born in the village. He's the first baby in nearly 2 years. His mother, a wide-hipped woman with quiet strength, names him after a bird known for surviving harsh winters. You help build his cradle from scraps of pine and weave a blanket from goat wool and old fabric. When he opens his eyes, you wonder if he'll ever know what the world used to be, or if the world he grows up in will seem like the way things were always meant to be. You keep a few treasures in a small basket near your sleeping mat. A bent piece of bronze, once a knife, maybe. A smooth stone you found near a stream that fits perfectly in your palm. A small shard of painted ceramic from a city you no longer name. You're not holding on to the past exactly, more like letting it breathe beside you. It's a reminder of where you came from, of what was lost, of what's still worth saving. And maybe that's the quiet brilliance of these forgotten farmers. They didn't wait for the cities to rise again. They didn't petition the gods to bring back the old order. They didn't need a palace or a market square to keep going. They just kept going. While kings fell and scribes fled, they planted beans and sang to their children and patched their roofs with straw. It's not flashy. It's not glorious, but it's real. And in a world where everything once collapsed, that's enough. You reach the edge of a hill and look down into a valley that feels oddly still. Not peaceful, just empty. The kind of quiet that makes your skin prickle. The wind moves through tall grass, but nothing else stirs. At the center of the valley are the remains of a city, or what used to be one. You don't know what name it carried when it was alive. Maybe it was Mycenae, or Tyrans, or Pylosaur, some smaller cousin swallowed by time. But the bones are unmistakable. Great stone blocks once stacked with purpose, now tumbled and overgrown. The gate still stands, just barely. You can't look at it without picturing what it must have guarded. You descend slowly, cautiously. The stories of ghost cities aren't just metaphors. Sometimes bandits squat in them, sometimes disease lingers, and sometimes a silence that deep feels like it could swallow you whole. But you press on, boots crunching gravel, until you're standing in what was once a courtyard. There's a well choked with weeds, a slab of stone etched with symbols linear B. You think, though you don't read it, that script belonged to the scribes, the palatial elite, the ones who disappeared when the walls fell. You're standing in a Mycenaean ghost town once. This place was the height of Bronze Age, power-thick walls, elite warriors, storehouses packed with tributes, chariots, perfumed nobles in embroidered linen, now just rubble and wind. You find a shard of pottery painted with spirals. The glaze is still faintly red. You wonder if the person who painted it ever imagined their art would be found like this centuries later by someone scouring for edible weeds. You pocket it not because it's valuable, just because it's proof that someone lived. There are signs of a hasty exit, scattered bones, a cooking pot left in the ashes, tools still on a workbench. The city wasn't peacefully abandoned. It was left mid-breath, like someone shouting fire, but never finishing the word. What happened here? War, famine, a disease that hit too fast? Or was it that slow, steady, decayed kind you don't notice until the roof finally caves in? Scholars still argue about what finished off the Mycenaeans: earthquakes, invasions, internal rebellion. Pick your theory. The linear B records vanish around the same time the palaces fall. That's no coincidence. Writing wasn't for poetry. It was for tracking grain, managing slaves, recording how many jars of oil were sent to the king's cousin. When the palaces died, the purpose for writing died with them. And yet the people didn't all vanish. The cities crumbled, yes, but some survivors scattered into the hills, the coastlines, the islands. They stopped writing, stopped building monumental architecture, stopped organizing their lives around royal bureaucracy. It's called the Greek Dark Age for a reason. Archaeologically, it goes dim, but dim isn't dead. In fact, the villagers you met last month might be descendants of the ones who fled here. They still use words that sound like echoes of older tongues. They still bury their dead with beads and bronze when they can find it. They still tell stories of heroes who fought with lions and fire, though no one really believes them anymore. You sit down on a crumbled wall and try to imagine this place at its peak. Priests moving through courtyards, scribes hunched over tablets, warriors oiling bronze blades. It all feels so distant, now too extravagant, too breakable. This city didn't fall because someone pushed it. It fell because it couldn't bend. You spend the night camped inside one of the ruined homes. The roof is long gone, but the stone still holds some warmth from the day's sun. You light a small fire, cook a thin soup from lentils and dried herbs, and listen to the wind moan through doorways built for kings. Sleep doesn't come easy. You keep thinking about how all these stones were cut, hauled, placed by hands not so different from yours. And now they're a shelter for someone who would have never been allowed through the front gate when this place was alive. One strange detail stands out. You find no signs of a battle, no charred remains, no arrowheads, no crumbled siege works. It's like the city just gave up. Maybe that's what really happened. Not a fiery conquest, but a slow suffocation. One trade route lost, one harvest failed, one too many enemies gathering strength, while the palace argued about protocol. And when the end came, it wasn't with a bang. It was with a packed cart and a last look over the shoulder. Back in your own village, when people speak of the past, they always use big words: collapse, fall, ruin. But here, walking through the bones of Mycenae, something like it too, start to see the truth. Civilizations don't always crash. Sometimes they just stop working. And the people inside, the ones who aren't kings or generals or scribes, they do what they've always done. They leave. They adapt. They survive. There's a fringe idea floating around among modern historians that the collapse wasn't entirely negative, that it forced a leveling of society. The palaces vanished, but so did the burden of elite control. No more tribute. No more forced labor for vanity projects. No more scribes tracking how many sheep you owned and whether you'd sacrificed enough to the gods this season. In the long view, maybe the collapse opened the door for a different kind of life. You can't decide if that's hopeful or just a tidy excuse. You don't romanticize collapse. You know what it costs. But still, there's something in this city's silence that feels less like death and more like sleep. Maybe the land is waiting. Maybe the stones are 2 in the morning. You wake early and place the pottery shard back where you found it. Let it rest. Let the past breathe. Then you leave the ghost town behind, following a narrow path downhill toward the sound of water and birdsong. The cities are gone, but the people are still walking. And that, at least, is something. It happens quietly, almost like a joke. You go to repair a sickle blade that's cracked at the edge. And the blacksmith, you can even call him that, more of a tinker with a fire pit, shakes his head and says, "No more bronze." You blink. "What do you mean, no more bronze?" He shrugs. "Haven't had any in months. Maybe longer." You stare at the half-ruined blade in your hand, suddenly realizing that you've been living off leftovers from a world that doesn't exist anymore. Bronze is dead. Not metaphorically, actually, practically dead. And the problem with that is simple. Bronze is what the whole old world ran on. You used it for tools, for weapons, for ceremonial masks and door hinges and chariot wheels and about 100 other things you never even thought about until they weren't available. And now you're holding a hunk of metal that might as well be a rock, because without tin to mix with copper, there's no more bronze, just copper, soft and clingy, like the annoying cousin at a funeral who won't stop touching you. This is what happens when global trade collapses. Tin wasn't local. It had to be hauled across deserts, mountains, and half the known world to reach the forges. That worked fine when there were merchant fleets, taxes, tribute, and cities with shiny docks. But now there are wolves in the forests, and no one patrolling the roads. The roots are broken, the alliances shattered, and tin has become a rumor. You try using stone tools again. It feels like a regression, like walking backward into a cave. But necessity doesn't care about dignity. You learn to sharpen obsidian blades and reinforce them with wooden handles bound in rawhide. You use bone needles, grind grain with flat stones, and cut firewood with tools that would have made your great-grandfather laugh or cry. But somewhere in the distance, something new is stirring, or rather, something old. Iron, it starts as a whisper among the tinkerers and the wanderers. Iron is terrible, they say. Brittle, inconsistent, more trouble than it's worth. But it exists. You can dig it out of the ground yourself. No tin caravans required. You don't need to beg a merchant to smuggle it past 3 burned-out cities and 2 bandit kings. It's here in the hills. If you're stubborn enough to dig for it and foolish enough to try forging it, he's half mad, probably. He spent weeks hauling rocks, heating them with charcoal in a pit furnace, and hammering the results like he's trying to beat the old world back into shape. What comes out is ugly, lumpy, uneven, but it cuts. Badly at first, better with practice. And the more they tinker, the more these amateur blacksmiths figure out how to coax the iron into usefulness. Iron doesn't melt like copper. It has to be persuaded worked hot, not liquid. And that means a whole new kind of forging, a whole new set of skills. There are no instruction tablets for this, no school, just trial, error, and maybe a few explosions. The early blades are worse than bronze, but slowly, as if the metal itself is evolving alongside you, iron begins to catch up. You get your first iron blade from a traveling metalworker who looks like he's been struck by lightning one too many times. It's heavy, pitted, slightly warped, but it works. It stays sharp longer than your flint tools. It hacks through roots without breaking. You don't know it yet, but this is the beginning of something massive, not just for you, but for the entire world. You've heard historians talk about this transition, like it was planned, like people calmly switched from bronze to iron as a matter of convenience. But standing here with this ugly, uneven blade in your calloused hand, you know better. It wasn't a leap forward. It was a desperate scramble out of a burning house, grabbing whatever material didn't melt in the flames. Iron wasn't progress. It was survival. Some of the old guard, the few scribes or priests you meet along the way, act like the rise of iron is a kind of blasphemy. It's crude, they say, unrefined, and maybe they're right. Bronze was polished and noble. Iron is dirty, loud, violent. You don't ritually anoint an iron sword before battle. You pound it into shape and hope it doesn't snap in your hand. And yet, here it is, growing more common, sharpening itself into history. You notice the change in other ways too. Bandits now carry iron blades, not scavenged bronze. Farmers have iron-tipped plows, which bite deeper into soil and leave straighter furrows. You even hear rumors of an iron axe that can fell a tree in half the time it takes with flint. At first, you think it's an exaggeration. Then you see one for yourself, wielded by a herder with arms like tree trunks. He splits logs like they owe him money. There's a debate among scholars now about whether iron was a cause of the collapse or a response to it. Some fringe theorists suggest iron was too good, that it disrupted the elite's control over bronze trade, undermined palace economies, and led to social instability. Others argue that iron was simply the only available option once the system imploded. Like using a rusted bucket after your golden goblet falls down a well. You're firmly in the second camp. You don't care about theories. You care that your new sickle works, that you can cut grain faster, that you don't have to bargain with a man 3 valleys over for a few broken shards of bronze. You start to see signs of ironworking popping up in other villages. Smoke plumes from simple furnaces. The rhythmic pounding of hammers against anvils made from salvaged stone. Children gather around to watch the sparks fly wide. There's something primal about it. The forging of metal feels like the forging of hope. Hot, chaotic, dangerous, but real. It won't be refined for a long time. Iron still cracks, still rusts, still misbehaves, but with each blade, each plow, each horseshoe or fishhook hammered into existence, your world shifts a little more toward something new, not a return to the glory of bronze, not a resurrection of empire, just a different path forward. Rougher, louder, maybe stronger. You look down at your hand, calloused and burned from working the forge with your neighbors. In your palm is a small iron knife, just finished, crooked, sharp, a little too heavy. It's not perfect, but it's yours. And in this world that forgot how to be perfect, That's more than enough. You hear the song before you see the village. It's not formal music, no lyres, or harps, or elaborate choral arrangements like the old cities once boasted, but it's music all the same. A single voice, a little raw, carrying through the dusk as you walk a winding trail down a rocky slope. It's a kind of chant repeating verses with slight changes. Something about a man who outwits a lion by tricking it with fermented dates. You can't help but smile. It's ridiculous and somehow deeply comforting. For the first time in a long while, someone is telling a story that isn't about loss. When you reach the village, stone huts and low walls tucked beside a cold river, you realize no one's writing anything down. There are no tablets, no scrolls, not even scrap hide with marks scratched into it, and yet they all remember. The children recite stories like they're chewing on them. The elders sing histories around the fire. You meet a boy, maybe 10, who can repeat 20 generations of his mother's family, going all the way back to someone named Stone Nia, nickname, apparently, for a man who survived a bear attack. No documentation, no monument, just memory. You're in what people will one day call the Greek Dark Age, though to you, it doesn't feel especially dark. Sure, there are no palaces, no armies marching in clean formations, no imports from Cyprus or Egypt, but there's warmth, community, and a strange new clarity. The stories are still here. They've just gone from carved into clay to carved into minds. Back in the Bronze Age, everything was written down. Linear B tablets, tracked livestock, rations, trade shipments, and the names of deities. Bureaucracy was sacred, but it was also fragile. Fires and raiders made quick work of those clay archives and the language itself. Linear B basically vanished when the palaces did. The scribes were trained in specialized schools, their knowledge confined to elite classes. When the elite collapsed, so did the script, and so your world adapted. You don't write anymore. You remember. There's a girl in the village who knows a version of the tale of a man named Odysseus, or something close to it. The name changes slightly every time she says it. In her story, he's not a war hero, yet just a clever farmer who once tricked a sea monster by dressing like a woman and hiding in a sack of olives. You laugh because you've heard other versions where he's a prince, a thief, a god. No one seems to mind the differences. The story lives in its retelling. That's what oral tradition does. It mutates like a living thing. You've come to realize that in this time of slow rebuilding, the people who speak and listen are more powerful than those who once wrote, because writing can burn. But a well-told story, it migrates, and there's a rhythm to it. These stories aren't just entertainment. They're memory scaffolding, lessons on how to survive a famine hidden in metaphors about goats and greedy spirits, maps disguised as songs, warnings wrapped in riddles. They tell of when to plant certain seeds, how to treat bee stings, which mushrooms are safe, and which will make you see ghosts. There's one elder missing most of his teeth, who tells a particular story every winter. It's about a city made entirely of gold, so beautiful that people forgot how to plant their fields. They grew lazy, waiting for gold to feed them. Then a fire came, and the gold melted, and the fields were dust. Everyone died. The moral: don't forget the land. He tells it the same way every year, the same pause before the fire, the same rasping cough before the last line. You don't need writing to keep a warning alive. You just need repetition. Someone to care enough to keep saying it. There's an ongoing debate, at least in the future, about how much culture really survived. The Greek Dark Age. The loss of writing meant that political histories, epic records, even laws were lost. But at the same time, something new was being born. The seeds of the Iliad and the Odyssey. The foundations of Greek myth, the origin stories of gods and mortals, all of it began here. In small places like this, around firelight, shared by people whose names would never be carved into stone. Some fringe scholars even believe that the collapse of written culture was a kind of liberation. Without the bureaucratic weight of the palaces, ideas could travel lighter and freer. You didn't need royal approval to compose a tale. You didn't need a priest to declare something sacred. If you could speak, canned others would listen. You had power. And yet, the downside is real. Memory is slippery. Stories morph. Facts bleed into fiction. A harvest ritual becomes a heroic myth. A warning about drought transforms into a tale about a jealous god. Is it history? Is it metaphor? At some point, no one can tell anymore. And maybe they don't need to. One night, a storm rolls in from the sea. Everyone crowds into the central longhouse, 30 people packed shoulder to shoulder. The fire flickering as rain drums the roof. And someone begins a story, not with once upon a time, but with a steady chant, a beat you can feel in your ribs. It's about a woman who stole fire from the gods and hid it in her mouth. Every time she spoke, her words burned and her enemies were silenced. You listen, transfixed. When it's over, someone else picks up the rhythm and begins a new tale. This is your theater, now your university, your archive. It's messy, loud, imperfect, and alive. You think about writing sometimes, about what it must have felt like to have permanent words, instructions, inventories, names you could pass down exactly, unchanging. And yet, when you try to picture a tablet in your hand, it feels cold, heavy, unwieldy. You carry your stories in your breath, Nguyen, your voice in your memory. They live only if you share them in the morning. You hear a child repeating lines from last night's tale while chasing a chicken through the grass. She stumbles, giggling, then recites the ending correctly, her voice rising like a little priestess. You smile. That story will live another generation, shaped by her tongue, her life, her rhythm. The world lost its scribes, but it found its storytellers. And you, somehow, are one of them. You're squatting near a fire, watching a man hammer red-hot metal like he's trying to fight it into obedience. Sparks leap into the air and vanish into the dusk. He wipes sweat from his brow with a ragged sleeve and says something you don't catch, maybe a curse, maybe a prayer. Whatever it was, the blade he's working on just cracked in half again. You flinch. He doesn't. He just tosses it into a growing pile of failures and starts over with another glowing lump of iron. This is your introduction to early ironwork, part miracle, part madness, mostly frustration. You're in the presence of what might be called a blacksmith, though he wouldn't call himself that yet. Titles are still catching up with reality. He's just a guy who burns things until they bend. And in a world where bronze has become a relic of another age, This man with his cracked fingers and singed eyebrows is more valuable than any priest ever was. Iron has its own personality, meaner than bronze, more demanding. Bronze was smooth, obedient, easy to melt and pour. Iron has to be beaten into usefulness. It doesn't flow, it resists. It needs heat, time, and a stubborn streak that borders on insanity. The smith here has all three. He learned the hard way, as most people do now: trial, error, and a lot of burns. The first tools are crude. You've seen bronze knives that could slice through hide like butter. These early iron ones, not so much. They chip, they warp, they rust if you look at them sideways. But when they work even just a little, they last. And the materials, they're everywhere. Iron ore litters the hills like treasure no one noticed until the old economy collapsed. You don't need to sail to Cyprus or beg a caravan for tin anymore. You just dig, burn, and hope. There's a growing energy around these smithing fires. You feel it the way people gather to watch a blade being hammered into shape, like they're witnessing magic or resurrection. Because that's what this is, the slow rebirth of craftsmanship, technology, and power. Not the kind of power that gets crowned and worshipped, but the kind that splits logs, tills soil, and defends your goat from something with more teeth than sense. The first time you hold a finished iron knife, it feels wrong, heavier than you expect, uneven, a bit ugly. But you test it on a stalk of wild grain, and it cuts clean through. Your mouth goes dry. You don't say anything. You just nod and hand it back. And the smith grunts in satisfaction, already reaching for the next piece of glowing ore. You trade for 1-2 days later 3 loaves of barley bread, a spool of cord, and a promise to help gather wood for the next batch of charcoal. It's steep but fair. Tools like this are becoming currency in their own right. A good iron blade can be traded for food, shelter, even protection. You've seen entire disputes settled by who owns the better hoe, and slowly, across the land, the sound of bronze fades. The old scraps are gone, melted and reused until there's nothing left but greenish stains in the dirt. The smiths who once worked with copper are learning the new craft, or fading away like the temples they once supplied. The shift is quiet, almost invisible, but irreversible. The Iron Age doesn't announce itself with trumpets. It sneaks in through the smoke, one ugly knife at a time. Historians still argue whether iron was a downgrade or a breakthrough. Technically, early iron tools were inferior to high-quality bronze. But quality doesn't mean much when your materials are trapped behind burned-out trade routes and marauding war bands. Iron was here. Iron was democratic. Anyone with enough fire and fury could shape it. There's even a strange side effect to iron's rise. Some call it the equalizer. In the Bronze Age, weapons and tools were expensive, elite-controlled, tied to palace economies and ritual. But now any village idiot with a hammer and a hot rock could make something useful. No royal seal required. No priestly blessing. Just sweat, fire, and stubbornness. And that changes everything. Not overnight. Not with fanfare. But blade by blade, nail by nail, the world rebuilds, not as it was, but as it must be. Rougher, yes. Simpler, certainly. But alivened. Yours. A charcoal pit and a stubborn streak could arm himself, or feed his family, or build a wall. You feel it happening. Power isn't hoarded anymore. It's sweating out of smithing pits in 100 little backwoods settlements, spreading like wildfire. Fringe thinkers of your time, and yes, there are always a few people bold enough to think fringe, even after a civilizational collapse, are starting to suspect that iron isn't just a new material. It's a new order, one that's less centralized, less ceremonial, more practical. You met a woman who said it plainly while carving a hilt. Bronze belonged to the kings. Iron belongs to the rest of us. Still, it's not easy. Iron is unforgiving. You've watched a man nearly lose a finger trying to split a failed blade. Another burnt his eyebrows off during a misfire. One smith collapsed from the fumes of a poorly vented forge. There's danger here, but also something electric, something alive. The smell becomes familiar. Burning charcoal, hot iron, singed wool. You associate it now with progress, with resilience. It seeps into your clothes, clings to your hair. Some nights you dream of hammers striking anvils, ringing out into the cold air like the heartbeat of a new age. There's still no empire, no cities rising from the ashes, no gleaming palaces of iron, but there is a different kind of future, taking shape, one that doesn't require divine kings or elaborate rituals, just sweat, grit, and a fire hot enough to bend the bones of the earth. You look at the blade you helped shape, still rough, still warming by the edge of the fire. You think of the old world and its smooth bronze, its perfect curves, its fragility. Then you think of this blade, doubly scarred, real, just like you. You don't expect much when you first spot the purple sails on the horizon. Just another boat passing by, maybe some desperate traders clinging to old maps and fading hope. But as the ship glides into the bay, all carved prow and patched hull, you notice something different. The crew moves quickly, efficiently, barefoot, on hot planks and rigging lines like dancers. They unload crates wrapped in woven reed mats, and when the lids come off, the entire harbor fills with the sharp, heady scent of something rich and strange. Someone near you whispers, "Phoenicians, like they're part myth, part miracle." And suddenly you realize, not everyone is stuck in survival mode. These people, traders, artisans, wanderers from the Levanten coast, aren't limping away from collapse. They're riding it, navigating the broken world like it's just another storm to steer through. The Phoenicians aren't here to rebuild the old kingdoms. They're here to make new ones, floating ones, moving ones stitched together with sailcloth and silver-tongued deals. They trade everything: dyes, wood, glass, metal scraps, fishhooks, knives, and stories. But the thing they're most famous for, the thing that makes people lean closer and whisper, like it's forbidden, is the color purple. Specifically, Tyrian purple, pressed from the glands of sea snails. So potent and rare, it was once worn only by kings. Now they bring it in jars, sealed with wax, offering a tiny smear of it in exchange for your best goat cheese or a well-woven tunic. You try not to flinch when they smear it on cloth. It's like watching someone paint with sunset. But it's not just the goods that make them valuable. It's their connections. They've been to places you thought didn't exist anymore. Crete, Sicily, maybe even Egypt again. Their language is quick and slippery, full of borrowed words and clipped syllables. Their eyes flick constantly between the shore and the Salzoes, calculating, always moving. They remind you of the old world's traders, but leaner, sharper trimmed, down by necessity. No ceremonial robes, no entourage, just survival with flair. You spend a few days helping them unload. In return, they teach you how to lash crates so they don't shift at sea. One of them, smiling, scarred, with a laugh like broken bells, shows you how to patch a cracked hole with tree resin and goat hair. You ask how they learned all this, and he shrugs. Same way everyone does now. Trial, error, running away at the right time. There's a strange confidence in them, not arrogance. Not exactly just the calm of people who've been living in chaos long enough to stop panicking. They tell you that where others saw the collapse as an ending, they saw opportunity. As inland kingdoms fell, coastal communities became more important. Fewer taxes, fewer restrictions, more room to move. The sea became a highway, not a border. There's one Phoenician who speaks your dialect unusually well. She tells you about Byblus and Sidon cities, still clinging to the cliffs, still trading cedarwood and papyrus, still holding ceremonies and shrines carved into the rock. We adapt, she says. When others hoard, we trade. When others fight, we move. That's how you live. And then she pulls out something small, flat, carved into clay. You think it's a tablet at first, but no, it's something simpler. A series of symbols, curved, straight, clean. It's not linear B, it's not pictographic. It's alphabetic 20-odd characters, one sound per symbol. She sees the look on your face and smiles. Fast to learn. Easier to carry, not just for kings and scribes. She teaches you the first few symbols, and you stumble over them like a toddler learning to walk. But there's something addictive about it. It makes sense. It doesn't require years in a temple or access to palace schools. Anyone could learn this avenue. You hear later from a wandering scholar, yes, those still exist, that the Phoenicians are the bridge between ages. They're preserving the bones of the old world literacy, trade, navigation, but stripping out the bulk, the unnecessary flourishes. They don't build empires. They build networks, floating, shifting, always adapting. They're not trying to restore civilization. They're designing a new one, version 2.0, optimized for survival. There's a theory fringe, of course, that without the Phoenicians, the alphabet wouldn't have spread. That modern writing, as you'll come to know it, wouldn't exist. That they jump-started literacy, not with marble libraries, but with practical trade notes and shipping manifests, ink on linen, chalk on stone walls, letters for trade, letters for songs. You try writing your name in their script one night, scratching it onto driftwood with a bit of charcoal. It's shaky, uneven, but it's there. And for the first time, you feel a flicker of something you thought was lost when the temples crumbled. Legacy. Before they leave, the Phoenicians trade you a small clay tablet pressed with their alphabet, wrapped in oilcloth. You keep it like a charm hidden in your pack, taking it out sometimes just to stare at the symbols. They look like the bones of words like sound made solid. The thought that you can carry language now, not as a priest, not as a scribe, just as a person, that's a power you didn't know you missed until it was back in your hands. The ships sail out at dawn, purple sails glowing in the first light. You watch them until they vanish, wondering where they'll go next. Carthage, maybe Sardinia, some port where the people still know how to barter in 3 languages and trust only what they can sail with. You turn back inland, the tablet in your pocket, and a few new words in your head. The Phoenicians are gone, but they've left you with more than goods. They've left you with the sense that the world is bigger again, that trade and travel and language aren't lost, just scattered. And you're starting to believe that maybe the world isn't rebuilding from its ruins. Maybe it's blooming from them. You notice it at first around the fire, how people lean in when someone starts to speak, how the noise of the village fades to nothing except the sound of one voice rising above the crackle of flames. No writing, no books, no tablets, just words spoken, remembered, carried like heirlooms in the minds of those still alive. The scribe is gone, the librarian too. What you have now is the storyteller. You watch him, a man not old, but aged by experience. His hair is flecked with ashore. Maybe that's just from the fire. His voice is low, steady, slightly rough. Tonight's story is about a warrior who can't be killed, not because of his armor or strength, but because he remembers every battle he's ever seen, everyone else's as well as his own. His memory protects him, lets him predict every blow, but in the end, it's that same memory that undoes him. Too much pain, too much loss. He walks into the sea not to die, but to forget. You sit in silence long after the story ends, the fire sputtering low, and you realize something. Stories are the new archive. They're how people are passing down knowledge, beliefs, fears, maps, survival, tricks, everything. And the strange part is they're working. People still tell the old myths, Gilgamesh, Enlil, Ishtar. They've changed, of course. Names shift, details blur. Some characters trade faces depending on who's telling the tale. But they endure, and new ones are born, forged in the fire of collapse. Stories about villages defending themselves with clever tricks, or spirits that guide refugees at night, or wolves that only attack those who forget to share their bread. Truth, myth, it doesn't matter. It's all the same now, useful, memorable, sticky. You notice that the best storytellers always include three things: rhythm, repetition, and meaning. They speak in beats, like song. They use the rule of three's three tests, 3 brothers, 3 days lost in the wilderness. There's a deep, almost biological satisfaction in it. You remember it without trying. A tale told well is like a seed planted in your skull. It grows whether you want it to or not. Someone in your village, an older woman with a limp and hands like knotted wood, tells only healing stories. She mixes herbs with tales. This leaf, she says, cures coughs, but only if you pluck it at dawn, like the shepherd who saved his wife from the mountain fever. She's turned medicine into narrative, and because of that, people remember. You've seen a 5-year-old gather healing plants in the exact pattern she described, muttering the story to herself like a spell. No scroll ever taught with such precision. That's the shift. The collapse didn't kill memory. It forced it to mutate. Instead of externalizing knowledge, writing it down, locking it in a vault, it now lives in the collective voice of the people. It's less stable, yes, prone to drift, but it's also faster, more accessible. Everyone is a student. Everyone is a teacher. You sit with children, teaching them the tale of the cedar tree that refused to bend in the wind and was broken in the storm. It's a metaphor, sure, but it's also a lesson in adaptation. They laugh at the ending every time, the way the tree ends up as firewood, and you know they'll tell it again. Maybe. Not word for word, but close enough. Some scholars, those few lucky enough to piece together burnt scrolls and half-rest inscriptions centuries later, will say that this was the true beginning of oral epic, that the long-form, memorized stories that would one day become heroic poems were being shaped right here in the mouths of survivors like you. It's hard to imagine these bedtime tales becoming the Iliad, but maybe that's how it always works. Big things starting from small fireside moments, names passed down not because they were famous, but because they meant something. Fringe theories go even further, claiming that some stories were intentionally created to encode knowledge proto-encyclopedias disguised as myth. A tale about a journey could map out trade routes. A myth about a flood might teach river patterns or seasonal risks. You don't know if it's true, but you've heard plenty of stories that feel suspiciously practical for something supposedly just a tale. You start telling stories, too, not because you plan to, but because someone asks you to one night. Tell us what it was like before, they say. And so you do, haltingly at first. Then, with more rhythm, you find yourself crafting your memories into scenes, exaggerating a little here, cutting a little there. You watch their faces, see which parts land, which parts fall flat. You revise, you edit, you perform, and suddenly you're not just remembering, you're shaping memory. Your version of events won't be perfectly accurate. That's the trade-off, but it'll survive. And the strange part is that matters more. A dry list of facts doesn't help a child fall asleep in a dangerous world. But a story with rhythm, stakes, and a little hope, that's medicine. And here's something strange you never thought you'd say. Maybe forgetting a little is okay. Maybe some parts of the old world are better off wrapped in myth, softened around the edges. You remember the palaces. Yes, but you also remember the corruption, the cruelty, the greed. In your stories, the kings are foolish or brave or tragic, but rarely divine. The scribes are clever, but not untouchable. The temples mysterious, not infallible. The stories let you tell the truth without telling the whole truth. That night, you lie on your back under the stars, listening as someone else tells a tale, this one about a girl who outsmarts a demon using a pot of lentils and a chicken feather. You smile. It's new. You haven't heard this one before. It's ridiculous and brilliant tanned, somehow probably true in ways no historian could ever measure. And you think, maybe this is what comes after writing. Not silence, not ignorance, but something messier, louder, more alive. A chorus of voices, a patchwork of memory. The human library rebuilt with breath. Your nose tells you before your eyes do something is off. It's that sour, cloying smell you've learned to dread. Not rot, not fire, but something in between. A living kind of decay. You pull your tunic up over your face as you enter the village and realize, too late, that you're walking into another outbreak. You've seen this before. It starts with a cough. Then comes the fever, the sweating, the shakes. After that, it's either recovery or a shallow grave. This time, it's a cluster of homes along a river bend. 3 already dead. One of them a child. The villagers are doing their best boiling water, separating the sick. But their best isn't always enough. You watch from a distance as 2 men, both pale with exhaustion, carry a body out of a hut, wrapped in linen and fear. Disease didn't disappear with the palaces. If anything, it got smarter. When cities fell, people thought maybe the worst of it, the dense, plague-ridden quarters would fade. But they didn't count on the new way people were living. Close, improvised, fragile. Villages weren't immune. If anything, they were perfect incubators. One bad meal, one infected water jug, one visitor with a cough. That's all it takes. You do what you can. Help bury the dead. Boil whatever can be boiled. Carry clean water and sealed jars, hand-washed with ash and river sand. You remember what the old woman in your last village told you. Never eat fish caught after a thunderstorm. Always burn the straw bedding after someone dies in it. Don't touch the sick unless you've smoked your hands over pine needles. You don't know if any of it works, but at this point, you'll try anything. Someone tries to blame the gods. It's a curse, they say. We buried the idol wrong. We stopped the festival too early. Others nod. They need a reason. They need to point somewhere. You can't blame them, but deep down you know this isn't divine wrath. It's biology. Bad luck. Human closeness in a world that hasn't figured out sanitation yet. There's a fringe theory you once heard from a passing healer. The collapse of the great cities didn't end disease, it just diversified it. Back then, cities had predictable plagues, measles, dysentery, parasites that came with overpopulation. But now, disease travels with every refugee, every lost caravan, every rat that scurries into a grain pile. No one's keeping records. No one's charting symptoms. You've heard of whole villages going blind, of coughs that end with blood, of people who sleep for 3 days and never wake up. Some of these stories are exaggerated, you hope. Others, less so, and still, people persist. Meet a woman, here wrapped in 3 layers of cloth, who boils herbs and applies poultices to the sick without hesitation. She doesn't flinch at fever or bile. She tells you she lost her husband to a lung illness 2 winters ago and decided to learn everything she could after that. I can't bring people back, she says, stirring a dark mixture of honey, bark, and ash. But maybe I can keep a few here longer. You want to believe her. You do. You stay a few extra days to help her. Learn a few things. How to tell when a fever is about to break. How to spot a sick animal before it spoils the milk. How to disinfect a wound using a hot iron knife, though you try very hard not to think about what that feels like. You grind herbs until your hands ache. You learn to listen to lungs with your ear pressed close, counting the breaths, watching for the gaps. One of the sick is a boy, maybe 9, eyes wide, cheeks flushed, sweat glistening like dew. You sit beside him for hours, telling him stories to keep his mind busy, about a wolf who learned to speak human language and tricked a king out of his throne, about a tree that grew silver leaves. You're halfway through a story when you realize he's fallen asleep, breathing steady for now. At night, you lie awake, trying not to cough, trying not to wonder whether you caught it. It's a gamble every time. You've known people who felt fine one day and were gone the next. But you also know you can't just walk away, not anymore. Not after what you've seen. Not after the quiet, terrifying dignity of people who keep treating the sick even after they've lost everyone they love. You help build a new quarantine shelter not because anyone told you to, but because it needs to be done. Far from the main path, with good ventilation and a stream nearby. The walls are made of woven reeds and daubed with clay. You add charms to the door just in case the gods are watching. After all, disease may not respect reason, but people still do what they can. You've seen this across every village, every region, the same makeshift hospitals, the same herbal knowledge passed like torches through the dark. No books, no doctors, no sterile instruments, just hands, memory, and hope. Later, when the sickness starts to ease, you feel it like a fog lifting. People step out of their homes and blink at the sun. Someone starts a fire for cooking, and soon the scent of bread replaces that sour edge of death. You help gather wood, feed the goats, boil another pot of water, even though it might not be needed today. Because habits keep people alive just as much as luck. The boy recovers. You don't say anything when he runs past you 2 days later, chasing a dog and laughing like the world never fell apart. You just watch him go, smiling faintly, and adjust. The mask of cloth still tied around your face. Years from now, someone will tell a story about this time, about the sickness that nearly took them, about the woman with her bitter herbs, about the stranger who stayed to help. Maybe your name will vanish in the telling. Maybe you'll become a side character or a symbol, or vanish entirely. That's fine, because you'll know that when the disease came, you didn't run, you stayed. You fought it the only way people can now, with sweat, stories, and stubborn, relentless care. And sometimes that's enough. It starts slowly, barely noticeable at first. A few more children laughing in the dust. 1 or 2 babies born in the same season, not just once a year, then 3, then 5. And before you realize it, your village, a fragile knot of weary survivors, starts sounding like it has a future again. Someone builds a second hut, then a third, a larger grain pit, another well dug by the edge of the ravine. No grand proclamation, no ceremony, just the quiet, accidental arrival of something no one expected. A baby boom. You wouldn't think a civilizational collapse would lead to more children. After all, this is the age of scarcity, of hunger, of rebuilding from mud and memory. But here they are tattling through the fields with half-tied sandals, tugging at goats' ears, babbling nonsense into the wind. And honestly, it's the most hopeful thing you've seen in years. Why now? Why here? It's not entirely clear, but in village after village along crumbling coastlines and highland pastures, the same thing is happening. People are having kids again, not just one. Not to preserve forever, but because it feels good to make a mark that might outlive you. Then a former scribe arrives, draws symbols in dirt, shows how thoughts can live outside the body. It's like a spell, you think. The kid's eyes light up. We can trap our thoughts and send them across time. You start recording in earnest. Plants, bloom seasons, star patterns on early harvest nights. You ask elders to tell stories again, and this time you write them down. When the first book is finished, there's no feast foods too precious, but a gathering. Everyone touches the pages like a sacred animal. A child reads the first line. This is what we know. So far, no one laughs, because it's true. This new education isn't about certainty, but curiosity. Not hierarchy, but conversation. Even wary elders admit, when kids draw stars on their skin with soot and berry dye, something important is happening that night. Under a cloudless sky, you think, this is what schools were always meant to be, not Factories for facts, but gardens for wonder. Then dash drums, low, steady, echoing through morning fog. You step outside to chaos. Children with ash-smeared faces, women weaving herb garlands, the square filling with painted stones, feathers, bread, bone trinkets. No one declared a festival. It just happened like breath, like seasons. Some call it the gathering, others renewal day. Elders just shrugged. Today. But you know, this is the first real celebration since the world fell apart. Not desperation, not ritual. Joy. Flutes joined drums, reed pipes, made by a boy who copied bird calls by listening to wind in hollow logs. A fire lights not for cooking, but for watching. People sit on stones. No high priest, just agreement. Today we gather. Today we remember the good. Today we give thanks not to old gods, but to each other. Food comes first. Flatbread, steamed roots, fermented goat milk, honey walnut cakes from last season's surplus. Gifts are exchanged, hand-carved toys, antler combs, with no expectation of return. The generosity makes your chest ache. Stories follow. River spirits weaving silver fish into hair. Fire demons dancing on dark nights. Kids inventing absurd tales of flying chickens. No one cares about accuracy. The point is sharing. And during the laughter, you notice something rare. People making eye contact. Long, lingering, easy. After years of looking down, looking away, they look into each other. That alone feels like a miracle. A contest erupts. Tallest tower from river stones. Teams form. Towers wobble, fall, rise. The winner stands, hip high, then topples into mud, splashing everyone. No prizes. Just applause. Wet feet. Music swells, clapping, drumming. A crude lyre from stretched hide and bent wood. People dance not temple perfect, but for the sake of movement. A limping man sways, supported by a woman laughing too hard to stand. They're terrible dancers. They're beautiful. You remember the old festivals, ornate, rigid, ruled by class. This has no grandeur, no perfection, but God's it's alive. Elders hum a harvest tune no one sung in years. One by one, voices join, half in harmony, half off key, but together. The song wraps around you like warm wind. You don't realize you're crying until someone bumps your shoulder. Grinning, holding out tea, drink, before the song ends. Later, as the sun sets, a girl steps into the circle. She holds dried herbs, a carved stone with her name, number, speech, just, I'm ready to take my place. Everyone claps. That's it. That's enough. Stars appear. Stories grow weirder. Roasted seeds pass around. Someone hands you a warm blanket. You lie back on dirt that no longer feels dirty and watch the moon rise. Laughter drifts into night air like incense. Quiet, steady, earned. Ga network. Not an empire, just understanding. He carries seeds, tool samples, stories, fishers, rebuilding boats from shell-blueprints. Mountain clans, harvesting cave heat, desert outposts, riding on sun-bleached bone. It's all coming back, he says. Not the old world, but something. He gives you a bark directory, your village marked, spring route, with a crooked little tree. You're part of something. Volunteers step forward to send your own messengers. A sharped girl, a saltlands. No one speaks. No one needs to. In the absence of temples. The world itself has become the sanctuary. Belief doesn't require power. just presence, attention, a willingness to sit with mystery, as an elder murmurs after a long walk. The gods aren't gone. They just learned to speak quieter. And maybe that's enough. Then letters arrive, tied to birds, wrapped in red tubes. Crude, half-drawn, but unmistakably messages. Grain ready, rain soon. Travelers north safe. We return soon. Communication after years of silence feels like resurrection. You build a message, post stone and woven sticks. Birds land sometimes. A clay bell rings. Everyone gathers. Someone reads even if it's just squiggles. Soon, a walking messenger arrives, sharp-eyed, staff carved with 5 regions symbols. He's stitching a network, not an empire, just understanding. He carries seeds, tool samples, stories, fishers rebuilding boats from shell blueprints, mountain clans harvesting cave heat, desert outposts riding on sun-bleached bone. It's all coming back, he says. Not the old world, but something. He gives you a bark directory, your village marked spring route, with a crooked little tree. You're part of something. Volunteers step forward to send your own messengers. A sharped girl, a man who walks like the earth might shift. They leave at dawn carrying greetings in 5 dialects, a carved token of your symbol. In their absence, connection grows. People trade ideas, not just goods. A shared shorthand spreads. 3 waves equals safe water spiral, equals news ahead handprint, equals we passed this way carved into trees, painted on stones, a grassroots language rising from dust. Hillfolk say it best. The collapse didn't end the world. It redistributed it. The pieces broke apart so they could learn to speak to each other. Weeks later, your messengers returns, sunburned, grinning. They bring news of 9 villages, healing remedies, fruit preservation methods, moon cycle calendars, newly mapped stars. One asks, interest in a yearly gathering, to trade, sing, teach, remember. Suddenly, the future isn't just possible, it's collaborative. You gather at night, no decisions, just imagining. What kind of world do we want to build now? Talk turns to roads, not paved highways, but safe. Footpaths, lined with waystones, shared symbols, common rules. No weapons in fire circles, shelter for all travelers. Leave what you can. Take what you need, not understanding. Elders caution. Last time the world got big, it got cruel. No one argues. But no one wants to stay small forever. This time, you'll build slowly, with roots, not walls. You look at the stars and think of fires burning on other hills. You are not alone. You haven't been for some time, but now you feel it. That night, someone carves a new post for the square, tall, smooth. At the top, the spiral. Below, the handprint. Beside it, the tree spring root. The stars seem less distant, now more like signposts, not guiding you to empires or towers, but to something quieter, something shared. Around you, the village settles, a child crying, a goat's grunt, embers, covered for the night. Low voices, trading stories, the soft flap of messenger wings. This is your world now. In their absence, connection grows. People trade ideas, not just goods. A shared shorthand spreads. 3 waves equals safe water spiral, equals news. A head handprint equals we passed this way carved into trees. Painted on stones, a grassroots language, rising from dust. Hillfolk say it best. The collapse didn't end the world. It redistributed it. The pieces broke apart so they could learn to speak to each other. Weeks later, your messengers return, sunburnt, grinning. They bring news of 9 villages, healing remedies, fruit preservation, methods, moon cycle calendars, newly mapped stars. One asks, interest in a yearly gathering, to trade, sing, teach, remember. Suddenly, the future isn't just possible, it's collaborative. You gather at night, no decisions, just imagining. What kind of world do we want to build now? Talk turns to roads, not paved highways, but safe footpaths lined with waystones, shared symbols, common rules, no weapons in fire circles, shelter for all travelers. Leave what you can, take what you need, not understanding. Elders caution. Last time the world got big, it got cruel. No one argues. But no one wants to stay small forever. This time, you'll build slowly, with roots, not walls. You look at the stars and think of fires burning on other hills. You are not alone. You haven't been for some time, but now you feel it. That night, someone carves a new post for the square, tall, smooth. At the top, the spiral. Below, the handprint. Beside it, the tree spring root. The stars seem less distant, now more like signposts, not guiding you to empires or towers, but to something quieter, something shared. Around you, the village settles, a child crying, a goat's grunt, embers covered for the night, low voices trading stories, the soft flap of messenger wings. This is your world now. That night, someone carves a new post for the square, tall, smooth. At the top, the spiral. Below, the handprint. Beside it, the tree spring root. The stars seem less distant, like signposts, not guiding you to empires or towers, but to something quieter, something shared. Around you, the village settles, a child crying, a goat's grunt, embers covered for the night, low voices trading stories, the soft flap of messenger wings. They'll say, there was a time everything broke, but the people bent, and then they built, and that will be enough. Good night, sleep well.